series director and EP Ben Karen, and finally we have music composer Martin Phipps. Congratulations to all of you, and now let's take a look at a couple of short clips to remind us of this barnstorming season.
My father used to give a sermon. God needs no faint hearts for his ambassadors. They are faint hearts. And I should have kicked them out when I had the chance.
Wow. Now, Gillian, I wonder if I can start with you. I remember talking to you a while ago after you'd shot the show, but I think it was before it had gone out. And I remember you telling me that you were incredibly nervous when you stepped onto set to play this character. You've since won a SAG award for the show, a Golden Globe, and now you're Emmy nominated. And I wonder how you look back at the kind of the whirlwind of being a part of this kind of machine for this season, and what part of the experience kind of really stands out most in your mind?
I think above anything else, what stands out is just how supported I felt through the whole process as an actor. You know, supported by production, supported by the researchers, supported by the hair and makeup team and the movement team. It's really like nothing I've ever experienced before. And I've heard other actors say the same, that it's been one of their favorite jobs. You know, they just want to keep coming back. And so I think above anything else, yes, I was absolutely terrified, but they took the producers took that into consideration. And what they do is they schedule the first 2 weeks of a new prime minister filming in the studio, so that if they discover that you do suck, they can go back at a smaller expense to reshoot if necessary. And just even that knowledge kind of helped me to relax, that we weren't, actually filming in Buckingham Palace and couldn't rent it again for another 2 years or something. So, but I think probably that above anything else.
Well, and one of the things that really struck me about your kind of portrayal of Thatcher is, we have this idea of her. We certainly see that kind of public-facing side of the Prime Minister in the show. We also see, her in more private moments, in her audiences with the Queen, but also at home, cooking and looking after her family. And there's a real kind of, it really is like a holistic approach to the character. We get to see a little bit of everything. How important was that for the mix for you?
Well, I don't, that aspect of it, I don't think necessarily even came across my mind. It's obviously down to the writers and, or actually to Peter Morgan and what he wanted of these characters. To get a real three-dimensional, wholesome, holistic view of them. And, with that, there was a BBC doc that came out, fortunately, exactly at the period of time that I was researching her. And within that, you got to see what she was like behind the scenes more than I think any of the other, screen grabs that I was able to get from YouTube or whatever. Because some of it, I wouldn't have believed, from what my idea was of Thatcher and her, but also that's again what was so amazing about the researchers is that you could literally ask for, when for instance her son Mark disappears, she was absolutely, poleaxed, just complete, and was really struggling and possibly even not necessarily running the country. She was completely distracted, from a woman who is, running 10 countries, not just her own, pretty much, to someone who barely can, she just was so afraid that, something dreadful had happened to him. And to get to see a snippet of that vulnerability, I think was really important to see the humanity in this, what would have been a three-dimensional human being, regardless of what one's feelings about him might be.
Now, Ben, you've been with the show since its inception, and every season brings new cast members. Every other season brings an entirely new cast. As someone who's kind of seen it all happen, I wonder how the changing faces affect the vibe of the set and whether they maybe even affect your approach to directing.
well, I don't know about that, but I guess my approach to sort of directing is always about the sort of visual identity of the scripts and the episodes, and that's always grounded in the emotional weather of the script. And as a kind of guiding principle, I like to focus on the anthropological weirdness of these people and the sort of cold, often lonely institution. So whether that's the piece of gravel in the shoe, the emotional sort of texture of the story that I can amplify through the visuals. For example, there's the scene in Fairy Tale in which the family greet Diana at the palace, and that was sort of written quite straightforward. But instead I sort of had the camera revolving around her Disneyly. It's sort of awkward and it's painful, and I wanted that camera work to sort of add to that feeling of being out of control, and that's a sort of visual motif that we use quite a few other times through the episodes. The sort of spiral staircases, the dancing. In terms of the approach with the actors, I guess it's the same relationship I had from season 1 through season 2 and season 3 and season 4, and it's about trying to work with the actors on finding ways to understand the relationships that they have with each other. For instance, I remember I was talking to Josh about his relationship with Camilla, and I always said to Josh that relationship had an element of a smoker trying to give up cigarettes. And so, like the scene in which he visits Camilla the day before his wedding rehearsal, I think originally saw him getting dressed in her room and kissing her goodbye. And instead, I kind of had Camilla silhouetted in the foreground in her home, smoking a cigarette, and the kind of shadowy figure of Charles standing in the distance beyond. And for me, that was sort of far more impressionistic about these complicated relationships in a more oblique way, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Josh, talking of complication, I mean, I dare say that the third season of The Crown kind of warmed a lot of people's hearts to Charles. In the fourth season, I think we're reminded why maybe some of those hearts were a little cold to begin with, and we see a very, very different kind of character here as he's going through this kind of complicated relationship, and it all comes to a head in this brilliant scene. I think this great argument in War, in which I think the phrase is a grotesque misalliance, which is his characterization of this marriage. Tell me about finding that different flavor to Charles this season, and how it felt to shoot that scene with Emma after having authored this complicated relationship all season long.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I sort of it's much nicer having a character that's loved or has sympathy. It's there is something really nice about. I remember when season 3 came out, and the kind of response that I was getting was like, "Wow, we really feel for Charles and we really love Charles," which felt really great. And it's not that anymore. So, but I guess that's my job was always going to be to show both sides, and that's what Peter, as Gillian said, that's what Peter does so meticulously, is that he doesn't go for the kind of the stereotype, and he doesn't go for the extreme. He shows the sort of the complications and the nuances of these relationships and these characters, and I suppose the I refuse any longer to be blamed for this grotesque misalliance. It was actually a line that I found really tricky, because at the time Peter had come in that day, and it was a little. I think Peter felt it was a little overwritten. I think there were a couple of lines that he felt weren't helping us, and he kind of came in and stripped them out and changed it, and it really helped the whole scene. But I did have, and Jess was directing that episode. I did say to Jess, I said, I'm not sure in the heat of this debate that he would have the, this is what I said, that he'd have the articulacy to say, I refuse any longer to be blamed for this grotesque alliance. And Jess gave me this brilliant note, which was like, you're assuming that this is something he's thought of in the moment. You've got to remember that he's been thinking about this grotesque misalliance for years, and that actually this, you know, the problem that Charles has, that he's unable to say what he's thinking, and so for the first time, really, this outburst comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, now listen, Martin, you've been the show's composer for 2 seasons now. And in season 4, we're kind of entering the world of the 80s, the era of Stevie Nicks and Duran Duran, who are both on the soundtrack this season. I wonder how the changing times kind of affected your approach to the score this season.
Yeah, I mean, the 80s, amazing decade, and what a musical feast there is. I mean, when I'm writing scores, I try not to concentrate too much on the music from the period, and otherwise it becomes a sort of, I mean, I let the tracks do that. There's some great tracks, as you've mentioned, in it. So it's really about trying to find the sound for the emotional journey of those characters at that time, and whether it's in the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, that didn't necessarily change that much for me. There are little bits of influences, and the character of Diana coming into the whole scenario, she felt like she needed a breath of a musical breath of fresh air to kind of sweep her into the picture. And so I did use some bright synthesizers and very bright electronics for her, and try and give her that kind of dazzling quality. But otherwise, I didn't try and go too close to the tempting as it would have been to get out my 80s synth collection. And I tried to stay away from that too much anyway.
Well, we're just about out of time, but Ben, I wanted to ask, you know, as someone who's been part of this show from the very beginning, we're about to see a new cast come in this next season, and I'm sure you can't really say a lot, but I wonder, what are your hopes for the show in the future? What do you kind of hope? Where do you hope it will go, I suppose?
Well, I obviously can't say anything about that, mainly because I'm not involved in season 5, sadly. But maybe season 6, we'll see. But I'm having a little bit of a break. But I think what I can say is I know what Peter is kind of creating is not just brilliant drama, but a long-lasting cultural legacy, and a thoughtful one at that, and a internalized drama that sort of sets the standard for everyone else. And I think he's managed to juggle standalone events and overarching storylines to create sort of world-class cinematic episodes. And from my experience of working with Peter since season 1, I'm incredibly proud of the work we've done together. And I'm no doubt sure that those that are now working on season 4 will carry on bringing that brilliance to the show.
Well, I very much look forward to seeing it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today.